Okay, great. I think Toma is back.
I hope. I have no idea
Yes.
what's going on.
Yes, we can hear you finally and see you.
Okay. How are you?
I'm good. How are you? How have you been?
Good, thank you. Well, very well. Very good. Just
Okay.
curious. Finally in after so long time. So
It's good
pleasure
to
to see you again.
see you, mate.
Good to see
So
you.
I'm
Right.
quite happy. This is a very intimate discussion. I know most of the people here, and we all know each other back to back. And I would like for participants to be part of a discussion rather than a discussion between me and the Rummān collection, the girls. So feel free to kind of put your thoughts and ideas down at any time.
Exactly. Yeah. Thank you, Shaikha. I think that's the entire point of this book club, wherein we have this sort of discussion that goes back and forth rather than it just being a one-on-one session. But yeah, with that, everyone, thank you so much for joining and welcome to today's session. Today is our 5th book club session and we're more than halfway through the book. For those of you who have joined in for the first time, Rummān Collective is a young collective and hopes to provide a platform for early career artists transitioning into the art world. Founded by 4 individuals, Alexis, Tania, Duha, and myself, Nava. We aim to bridge this gap between, through the means of various programs. With learning being one of our core objectives among creating and exchanging ideas, we're running ReadArt, a book club that encourages people to hopefully read about art and understand it better and to carry forward this dialogue within the art community. We've currently reached, as I mentioned before, the 5th chapter of this book, which is 7 Days in the Art World by Sarah Thornton, who is an art writer and sociologist. We wanted to begin this book as a learning aid to the functioning of the art world. Now, Sarah has covered various definitions of art throughout the book, and she has divided them into various conflicted clusters of subcultures, which in her opinion are the fair, the magazine, the studio visit, the biennale, and so on. The book covers a series of day in the life narratives of different art professionals and practitioners set in various locations all over the world. Of course, this was written back in around like somewhere 2008. So it's also important to see how the art world and its functionality has progressed or maybe even declined over the years. So for starters, like I believe that, there are so many more subcultures within the art world. But of course, like, more than those that have been covered in the book. But of course, like, it's regardless a good summarization of the art world. Now, each week, for the past 4 weeks, we have discussed one chapter as to not only encourage people to read, but also learn about the functioning of the art world. And with this, we take this book as a starting point. We have our own day in the life accounts, where we invite various guest speakers from similar fields that the book has covered. With that, I would like to welcome today's guest speaker, Shaikha Al Mazrou, who is a multidisciplinary artist who also happens to be my old professor at undergrad and an amazing friend. She originates from the UAE and is represented by the Lawrie Shabibi Gallery in Al Sirkal Aberdeen. So thank you for joining us today, Shaikha.
It's a pleasure.
All right, so we will unravel the chapter together. And of course, Shaikha will be sharing her experiences through her practice and work ethic as an artist. I think, as Shaikha mentioned before as well, and I think I speak for the both of us, that, this is meant to be a discussion. So we would love for you to, as always, as we have loved throughout our sessions, for you to be, more interactive and feel free to drop in comments or questions or just raise your hand or even just unmute yourself wherever you feel like, there's something to be discussed further, and just jump right into the conversation. Coming to the chapter, the studio visits, it's, in my opinion, a very important chapter, especially for an early career artist, discussing Takashi Murakami. I'd have to say it's been written in a way where the chapter itself becomes the artist's retrospective, discussing his work ethic, his concepts, his inspiration, the production of his work in specific, the Oval, among a lot of other works, and as well as, you know, what his standpoint is, along with his studios throughout the art world. But honestly, when preparing for today's talk, I found it rather difficult because the entire chapter felt like it reeked of commercialism. But I'm glad we have Shaikha here with us to, you know, discuss any misconception there is. So with that, my first question to Shaikha is, Shaikha, since the beginning, as student artists, we're always taught that being associated with a gallery is the end goal. What are the pros and cons of being associated with a gallery?
It's quite difficult to pin it down as pros and cons. I think as a student or as an artist, at least from my own personal perspective, you're always a student. You learn from gallery representation. So the idea of, you know, end goal shouldn't be the gallery representation. The gallery works together with the artist to mature your practice. You constantly evolve alongside the gallery representation. Now there are multiple different galleries approaches. And I would say I'm quite fortunate that I've worked with a gallery that is both commercial oriented, yet also are very open to welcoming ideas. I have tested their limitation with, you know, my endless experimentation, and I owe it to the gallery when, you know, I had very experimental ideas and risk-taking with using different mediums, such as, you know, when I started off their ceramic series, they were welcoming with the idea, given the fact that I was just, you know, into the idea of understanding a very specific type of ceramics, which was back in the day, black stoneware. And they have allowed that space of growth and not just necessarily limiting my practice with what is commercial, but there's also the commercial aspect, which I, as an artist, understand that, you know, at the end of the day, it's a gallery. It goes around fairs and it works as a sustainable kind of business. And you have to kind of match or balance, I would say, between both. Now, you can't be a product as an artist. So if your end goal as a student is to get into a gallery and that becomes your, you know, sort of, you know, end goal, then you don't allow yourself for growth. And that's where I would redefine the word of end goal to a constant growth as an artist. So of course, every artist would dream of, you know, a professional, you know, art institution, a gallery, a museum, where they see their work being displayed. However, as a young artist, I always advise there is so much of a playground that you can, you know, experiment and discover who you are as an artist before going into institutions and making a signature. So there's a fine kind of, there's a fine, you know, line between falling into the trap of getting that representation immediately without allowing yourself to constantly reflect within your own practice. And if you are with the right gallerist, at least, they would want to see not a signature, but would want to see a diversity of who you are as an artist.
I think these are great insights, especially early career artists, and possibly ones that are not recognized by galleries yet. It's good to redefine the meaning of what an end goal would be. So thank you for that. In the book, Murakami is portrayed to have 3 studios, or rather production factories, if I should say, spread across the entire world. Why do you think are artist studios so important? And do you think artists have enough access to studio spaces here in the UAE?
All right, I will start with should artists have artist studios? Yes, and as you can see, I am in my own studio. It is important to constantly, it's not as messy or you would see works. I have more of finished work up displayed. And I think it's always important to reflect on your own practice. It's good to constantly see and make and produce. And do we have enough studios in the Emirates? We do have studios. And I think a lot of artists, we don't have enough, but we do have studios for those who would seek studios. So I often hear from young artists, there isn't studios and there isn't that, but today we don't have a unified space where you can fabricate, like an art fabrication space. However, we do have small little institutions or led by artist spaces that are constantly growing in the region. But do we have enough to cater for the experimentation we want to go ahead with? No, we don't have.
Do you think, I guess it probably answers the question, given that, it's still a growing field. I suppose that maybe in the near future, there could be more of those,
Definitely.
right?
Definitely. Today, we see institutions reaching out to artists, asking them, what do you need? And I do recall I was in one of those meetings where the Abu Dhabi Tourism reached out to artists to write down what are the elements that are missing in the region. And it seems like the government intention there was to cater for these needs. And this is a very near future.
Yeah, I think it's very important. Yeah,
it's also interesting how on the other spectrum, you find that we're also redefining what a studio should be or is, whether it's a manufacturer or whether it's like your piece of device. A lot of studio visits are limited to a space that we're not used to. So I think that's also an interesting, especially in catering and developing the artist practice and directing it in a way.
True.
Definitely, especially speaking about studio spaces, there's a part in the book which says studio visits are more a pleasure than an obligation, and that it's a privilege to see incomplete work. Over the years, how do you think have studio visits, and like Dania mentioned, like even the idea of studios have become their own niche or a subculture on its own that possibly accelerates an artist's career?
Now, when we say studios there, we can go to two directions. So a lot of artists do have studios where they can do, as you mentioned, this private space where you get to see work in progress. And you've got the other type of artists and studios where you see a bigger rented warehouse with multiple of assistants. So there are like two directions, and I do believe in the next few questions we're going to get into the studios with assistants. Now, what I have as as an artist in this region, I don't have assistants because I work with hands-on directly with my own work with specific fabricators, and I don't call them assistants. They are fabricators. They are qualified fabricators to do construction works, and not necessarily artist assistants. And in the West, we see artist studios. I know a lot of artists myself where they have an entire warehouse rented out, and you would see assistants walking in and out, and they are artists, and they technically make the work for the artist. Now, this we would go into the other aspect of the book, I believe, where there is artist and his artisans or assistants. But if I were to answer your question in my own personal experience, this is my studio. I do my ideas here. I formalize my ideas here, conceptualize my ideas here, and if it's something that I can make it in this space, I would make it. If it's something out of the capability of what I have in my studio, I would have to move outside and look for spaces, as I mentioned, the construction side. So.
If I may also jump, now that we're discussing this aspect, from your opinion, and not just about your practice, but other artists around, when does the artist become an artist and when does the maker remain a maker? Because as you said, with such practices, there are a lot of blurry lines that sort of go on with that, where an artist assistant is literally producing the works.
This question is quite a question, it is rooted in the Renaissance period. And if we were to go and look into that in depth, I have a book here in front of me that I've prepared to kind of bring it. It's called The Art of Not Making. And it really traces it back to the Renaissance period. And the debate is still on. Now, what defines the object? There is a difference between what is art and what is craft, and a maker of a craft or a maker of an art. And what makes a work of art, and when is it an object for a mundane, everyday item to use? Going back to your question, Dania, so when does the artist become an artist? It's hard to answer that question because, if you were to call yourself an artist creating works for themselves to stand, then you are an artist. If you're making craft objects for it to be, whether it's like glass or vase, or that's craft. So there's a very distinct definition between art and, being a craftsmanship or an artist. And I have something here that I would like to also read from the same book. It just kind of raises questions, really doesn't say much. So, for example, here in the book itself, it says that can an artist claim that an object is a work of art if it has been made for him or her by someone else? And then we go back to the originality of the work. We go back to the authorship. Then we dive into, the creativity, or what they call themselves, the artist engine. So it's really kind of a tricky question, and it's a debate that is like a very hotly discussed recently. But it has been always, if you go into like Bernini's, the Rococo's period, you would see large sculptures that no one man could have done it. He had assistants, and it's documented in books.
I think, Shaikha, you've answered pretty much all of my questions that were meant to come up. No, but okay. So going back to where you said you personally don't work with fabricators, with assistants yourself, but coming from someone as experienced as you, and especially in comparison to the West, where artist assistants are so common. Like, for example, Murakami, he had his own, he had his own factory, and he would do so there's this part that's written in the book where Sarah's talked about Murakami visiting his own studio and saying that, he was on his way out, having just finished his daily inspection. And on numerous occasions, Murakami would, rely on the production of the work with the help of the assistants. So how would you say that, what does an artist assistant's role become in the art world, at the moment, given if it is in the West? Because I do realize that we don't have many here in the UAE. What do you think? I think it's pretty similar to where the craft and the fabricator and the role of all of them align with.
So in the same book I was reading, they would delegate, we see today contemporary artists. It's harsh to use the word lacks, but in the books, it kind of clearly says that contemporary artist lacks the technical ability to physically execute his or her work. And this is where, therefore they would delegate the work to physical labor. And I was reading the book and I was like, it's called physical labor now. I mean, if I were to be an assistant in someone's studio because I'm knowledgeable in creating, let's say, glass work, do I become a physical labor? So it's, I think, like the engine, the artist engine, the concept maker, there isn't anything wrong when you are, you know, the idea is the authors. And in the book, it kind of mirrors this as a filmmaker. So a filmmaker writes the script, but he does not act, he does not put the costume, he does not put the makeup, he does not. So that parallel discussion was quite to the point where's the authorship? So the authorship belongs to the artist, and who makes it in today's time does not matter. I mean, in the 1919s, since the Duchamp, you know, putting the fountain outside, he kind of wanted to not just challenge museums, but also what was the name written on. He didn't write Duchamp, Marcel Duchamp on the piece, but also giving credits to where it was brought from. And I think the role of the assistants is to kind of, it is tailored by the artist and made by the assistant. And we see here today, at least with the term like commissions, and the budgets given alongside the commissions. I put myself in this example. You go bigger, you go crazier with the, you know, with the budget, with the material. You go out of your limitation when a commission is given, and this is where the works are required to be sourced out or fabricated somewhere else, where there is that physical understanding with the medium. I'm currently doing a body of work that I won't be able to carve not in at least 10 years. But with the, you know, with the introduction of digital robotics, who made the work? Is it the assistants or is it the digital robot? And you know, it just, you know, the debate keeps on going today with, you know, artificial intelligence today. The entire sculpture is made with one button. I have made the drawing, but who did it? Is it the fabricator where I've made the marble piece, or is it the robot where the button was pressed on?
I'm glad you mentioned this, because my next question is that for an artist who has produced, say, for example, you know, the concept part of the work, how do you associate to the final product of your work being as yours when it's had someone else's, or in this case, something else's involvement in it?
Okay, so for example, I'm currently doing works with metal, and I don't have the physical equipment at site, and I've given my entire sketches. I've worked alongside hand to hand with these fabricators. Do I have the full knowledge to create this very specific type of metal on my own? The answer is very clear and transparent. No, I wouldn't have managed to precisely weld it in that certain way. And this is where I would ask someone who's a professional who understands the medium more than I do to help me out with creating it. Did he come up with the idea or understood what is it supposed to be made of? No, but did he contribute in the making of it? Yes, and I do give credits to that. Another example would be if I'm doing a painting or I'm doing paper making. I'm physically involved, and I wouldn't want you know, any assistance, because it's very, I as an artist, I find it very, like, it excites me, making excites me. And things like when it's out of my my field of you know, expertise, I still find like the authorship goes to me, while the crafts was made by professionals within a certain specific field. I have a perfect example behind me. The sculpture behind me is made out of 10 materials. Do I acknowledge that I know how to do all the 10 items together? No, I worked alongside art fabricators in an art foundry that are understands the physics behind them. I've tailored the idea. We worked alongside together, and it was fabricated and produced in another city.
So it becomes just, the exceed of it is a limitation of material rather than a debate of authorship.
Authorship goes alongside. I cannot pull out authorship out of the context. The originality of it. Let's say I fabricated a piece, and the same fabricator, one of the artists, wanted to create the same similar piece. Who does the authorship goes to? So the originality and the authorship goes to the artist who fabricated the piece. And I can't, just because I was an assistant, I can't be creating similar artwork and dismiss the authorship who produced this piece, and I go duplicate it because I have the skills to do it.
I think this whole debate, as like you mentioned, of authorship, and this goes way back, and I feel like it's something that is probably going to keep on following for like a lot of years, because no one really has a definitive answer to it, and it's like very, I don't know, it's a very tricky sort of line to walk on, I suppose. Okay, so let's move on to possibly another interesting sort of topic.
Can I ask a question?
Yes, please.
Hi, Sami.
Shaikha, how are you?
I'm good.
Good to see you, and the discussion was very enlightening. I had a follow-up question. Recently, I came across like this text that was talking about artists exploiting workers for their ideas. And I know this was like the general topic you guys were discussing, but I wanted to hear your personal views on the exploitation of labor, because it is technically labor, and they're not in most occasions credited. So I wanted to hear your views, and I love your work.
Thank you. Again, I'm going to speak from my very personal experience. So when I work with, let's say I'm working with metal and I'm going to construction site, this is where we spoke earlier about limitation of studio spaces for artists. I work alongside with them. I sit with the engineer, I sit with the guy who welds and the guy who grinds the pieces. And without that, let's say, ecosystem of artist, engineer, the labor, my work wouldn't have came to, its final outcome. And I don't tend to exploit the labor's work. In fact, they're being paid for that. So how am I exploiting what their labor, their efforts, when they're given their share of what they're doing? So they're not doing the works for free. I'm being charged as an artist to create a body of work, and they're given credits. They benefit from artists that, for example, when I worked with Kunstke Zarai in Switzerland, I'm not exploiting laborers. They're laborers in the factory, but I'm not, because their wages, their income, their positions, So I think it's a really a matter of positions and titles here, and I think where the book here kind of addresses a lot about just that that eagerness to define artist from artisan, and the work, who does the work belong to at the end. I'm not sure if I've answered your question fully.
You did. And I was gonna mention the second thing, which was in your case, and you regard yourself as an artist that does not exploit workers per se. But I feel like, there are many artists that would actually exploit laborers and not give them credit, for instance, and so on and so forth.
And this is where I enjoyed the interview by Michael Petrie, where in order for him to accumulate all these images, you would be surprised that for once a book does not put the artist name and medium, but also put the effort in saying where the works were produced. And in his interview, you can look him up. He was saying how difficult it was to reach out to artists and to know exactly where the works were fabricated.
Wow.
Because the entire book is purely about the art of not making, and he was hunting down, artists of, of course, Jeff Koons is someone that we would think of immediately. He has a factory of his own, and he mentioned each and every single artist, all the way from Duchamp and where he got the fountain, and traced it all the way down to contemporary artists.
Yeah, can I nitpick some more, or do you guys want to follow up on something else? Because I can.
Please go right ahead. I'm loving this, yeah.
Okay, I wanted to talk about when we regard artists of the past as something that is definite. Like, just because Marcel did it, that means it is valid, or just because Renaissance painters or artists did it, therefore in our contemporary age we can do it. Personally, I think for any artists like you that I personally know, I know your insides, and I know you wouldn't exploit anyone, not even like anything, not even an ant. But it makes me think in general, like other artists, does this enable an arena for artists to generally have the capacity to exploit laborers, have them work in like minimum wages, harsh conditions, to birth an artwork, present it, and sell it? يعني am I making sense?
Yeah, you're making sense, yeah.
Like I'm thinking of the repercussions of such an incident, I would say. You know what I mean?
Well, I'll take your question one at a time. So you started with Duchamp. Now we need to understand, in today's time, when we bring examples such as Marcel Duchamp's work, we cannot deny the time he came from and what kind of works were prior to his, to his time, and why we all know, I see all familiar names, we all know why the shock element was there. Did the shock element change his, persisters? Yes, it did, because it's no longer about royals, and it was not, in the book itself as well, it says it was a corrupt, materialistic time where, artists like Marcel and even like the Dadaist artist wanted to change what was displayed in the museum walls. And artists, after Duchamp started to adopt that language, started to adopt the ready-made, started to adopt losing the craft skills, and started to take, that this is where he discusses the lack of technicality, because the ready-made today, anybody can come and put something on the table and label it art. And if that's how it is presented, then it is art. And that we cannot not look into the history, when history was kind of tailored to change how we look at what is displayed in the museums. Other artists, do they exploit laborers? I'm sure there is. I'm sure there are hundreds of artists that would do that, but at least to be a professional artist and have, ethics as an artist, one shouldn't be doing that. So, you can't be telling people what is right and what is wrong, but I think giving credits to where the works are being done is ethically important as an artist.
Thank you, Shaikha. That was brilliant.
And just to add to that, I also, sorry, Suleiman, please go ahead.
Sorry, Nava. I feel like for me, I was just trying to compare it with the comparison done in the book with the filmmaking. And I feel like with filmmaking, it's very transparent. The editor is this, they credit, who's done most of the things, whereas there's a type of secrecy in the art world where it enables maybe somewhat what Sema was talking about, the exploitation of laborers or something like that. But then it goes back to what Shaikha was talking about, which was the ethics and the moral code of each individual. And this is where you define yourself as a human being, not just as an artist, you know. Yeah.
Thank you, Sulaiman. I would really encourage everyone to read this book because it was kind of an eye opener. He didn't just mention, the authorship as an artist and a filmmaker and the authenticity of making, but he also wanted to put that parallel of, you see the list of names towards the end of the movie. And this is what he was trying to do by the end of his book. When he made this book, he wanted to make sure that kind of credit is given. This is where the entire book says the new artisan relationship, and wanted to bring that credit and not call it, it's not the art of not making, and we see images of artists, but it clearly says the relationship between the artist and assistants that work together. But he constantly speaks about the separation of art and craft, but does not deny artists and assistants working together.
I have a question for all of y'all. So we're talking about the okay, we have the artist that's creative, and then we have the people who do the art. Then, like, my question is, would we credit the person or the conversation that inspired that idea? You know, like the thought that led to the idea that then in turn became that art piece, you know? Or do we just keep it on the down low and be like, yeah, I just dreamt of it and that happened, you know?
I think there is a particular distinction between inspiration and plagiarism. And once someone finds the severance, I feel like inspiration is when, I don't know, I'm also speaking out of bias, but to me, inspiration is when I see something and it resonates with me and I want to incorporate like my own imprint on something of the feeling it emits. But plagiarizing is literally like, for an example, taking a Rothko and copying a Rothko and saying, oh yeah, this is mine. You see, and Seyman, you and I and Adub are very familiar with that, but I feel like that's the distinction. Yeah.
Interesting.
Especially when the way that we perceive whatever is around us varies. We could, all of us, literally just look at the same thing and get inspired from the same thing, but then it leads to 500 million different routes. So I think it really also depends on the context.
But there is also what is called as appropriation, Sema. So I can paint an exact painting of Rothko and call it an appropriation of Rothko's painting. So it doesn't have to be inspiration per se, but it could be that, as an artist, I dedicate my life to create appropriations of artists around me, and that becomes me trying to kind of, go around the idea of, the appropriation came from the ready-made, whether you take an object or you duplicate it and call it an appropriated piece of work.
And then here, I feel like the subjectivity of a word would come in. Would it be appropriation or would it be imitation? And it would be like, what is it? You know what I mean? But that's very interesting because I've never heard about that before.
Appropriation?
Yeah.
You see, this work over here is by Cherie Levine, was an appropriation of Duchamp's urinal, which was made out of.
Oh, wow.
So if you duplicate a piece, there are 4 different types of appropriation, whether you imitate the artwork fully, or you take bits and pieces, or you take the idea of it and translate it into something else. So a lot of artists today, you would see, contemporary artists, well-known, established, would title the work an appropriation of XYZ artist.
I had a comment like way back, but I think I've lost track of it. I think we can move. Speaking of, production of artwork in particular, I have a question that's related to how, okay, so going back to the book in particular and discussing Murakami's work, because I think it's a good example, especially during this conversation as well. There is actually, let me read it out. So Murakami runs a company called, I'll probably butcher this, but Kaikai Kiki Co. Limited, which has 90 employees in and around Tokyo and New York. The company is involved in what his dealers call an insane range of activities. It makes art, it designs merchandise. One of Murakami's most visible commissions has been for the accessories giant Louis Vuitton. So I think this is something that's very important, especially during today's time. That and the fact that throughout the chapter, the dealers have also spoken about the importance of this particular Louis Vuitton work becoming an important over of his career that breaks boundaries between East and West, and, you know, between art and luxury goods and high and popular culture. So as an artist, what do you think about producing art as a supposed luxury good, or its, you know, potential commercialization?
It really depends, Nava. I feel like I wouldn't be the artist. I wouldn't do like commodity goods, decorative pieces. But that's just a personal point of view, very subjective as well. I want my artwork to stand for itself, to be as an artwork and not a luxury good. I want my work to be criticized in a museum wall and not as, a retail shop. So it really depends how you would want your practice to be seen and viewed, and each artist for themselves. If it was, to generate more income through putting it in retail shops and, souvenirs, or with luxury shops, I mean, lies down to the artist's choice. But for me as an artist, I really I want my work to mature and to be criticized and to be, appreciated on a wall, not as a commodity good, as a decorative piece.
To follow up with that, forgetting about luxury goods, but thinking about the high and popular culture, the same way that it is, but with the way the dealers are with certain galleries. Some works rise for simply following a trend, and we did discuss this earlier, both conceptually or technically. As an artist, that definitely would get tricky sometimes, but also depends on the gallery. But how do you avoid slipping into those while maintaining your image with a certain gallery, if it's even avoidable, especially when the demand a lot of times is dictated by the public through the gallery? So
I do get through the gallery, I do get very private collectors who are interested in specific works and would like to commission that very particular body of work. Now, there isn't anything wrong with having private collectors wanting that tailored piece, that commissioned piece. The thing is that you can't be a production factory. You shouldn't allow yourself to constantly do the same work because it generates more income. Then you don't allow yourself to kind of take different research route. You would just be, just like any other factory. Like I might as well open, a metal shop and make more of that. And you have to be selective. Where do you want your pieces to be? When you have people who where your works are going to go, at least my gallery is quite transparent where the commissions are going to go. I wouldn't say no. It's as an artist, yes, I would like to make more series of these works. But then when it's enough. When it's I'm not going to spend 20 years of my life making the same works, because I, as an artist, I'm interested in a research element. I've allowed myself to be a little bit more personal within the works. I would read sometime a book that would inspire my entire practice, or would change it into a different route. So you should allow yourself to not, I mean, I am known for a certain body of work, and people say, well, that's your signature. Yes, that's my signature, but I don't want to have that specific signature that would define my entire practice. So there isn't anything wrong going back to, you know, when the gallery comes and says, you know, these works were a success and we got more commissions, people asking for more of these works. It allows me to create different series, not the exact, but it allowed me to create different outcomes. I wouldn't have seen the different outcomes if I wasn't given these, you know, private commissions. But then, yeah, you just have to balance again, not to fall into the trap of just being a factory of the same product.
I feel like it depends on the artist themselves and how they define themselves. So even for you, Shaikha, you people try to be like, you have a signature. You try to always redefine yourself and experiment with something new. Whereas other artists have a goal of, okay, let's sell, you know. And I, not that I see myself as that type of artist, but I can't talk negatively about that type of artist, you know.
Yeah.
I just don't want to follow that footsteps, you know. And yeah.
See, that's it when you're aware as an artist, and that's a good example. You quite have a clear goal. You know, yeah, I do have a signature, but I don't want that to be a limitation to my practice.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Something coming back to when you said that, you know, there's a certain way that you would want your work to be reviewed in a particular, you know, say for example, in a museum setting or a gallery wall. Murakami says, I change my direction or continue in same direction by seeing people's reaction. My concentration is how to survive long-term and how to join with the contemporary feeling. To focus on nothing besides profit is, by my values, evil. But I work by trial and error to be popular. Shaikha Al Mazrou, how do you work to be popular?
Okay, I would start with the things that I don't like. It's not about fame and being popular. A lot of people think, you know, we go back to the very first question, which is the end goal of student to be represented by a gallery. It's again, having opportunities, the right opportunities, and taking in the right opportunities is what makes you a good artist, not the fame and not, you know, being popular. I don't even think about that. What allows my, you know, I always find commission-based projects a playground, and I get really excited about them because it really allows me to take, you know, ideas further, experiment with different materials. If I'm not the artist in the book, and he says, like, for the profit of it and for the fame of it, and I don't want the profit of it and I don't want the fame of it. I want the appreciation of the work, the understanding behind the concept of my work, the messages to be read clearly. And for me, if that was delivered, that is the goal, and not the fame or popularity.
So humble, Shaikha.
No, it's not about being humble.
No,
It's generally, this is what I at least preach, you know, students and peer friends, and if you're only gonna, I can be popular by making roundabouts commissions. We spoke about that earlier last week. We get commissions where I can make, you know, easy commissions that would give me fame. But do I want that? It's easy profit. It's an easy name. But does that define my practice, my authentic practice? It doesn't. So I don't want that.
In that case, do you, you know, have critiques, like, or possibly reviews ever affected, like, your own work, the way you perceive it, or the way you perceive your practice, maybe change the way you think about your own work? Do you sometimes maybe get insecure by going through reviews?
Questioning is always good. So it's important to question your own practice, whether it's just one-on-one with yourself, questioning your own practice, or you have either a curator that you worked along with and you feel comfortable kind of to discuss ideas, or even your gallerist or a group of friends, which we had previously, is to sit together and criticize the work. And again, the term criticize in this region is a little bit of it's difficult to define here, but I often do that, and it just makes it just refines ideas, future ideas, in a much better understanding. So I always criticize my works, like I would have done this better if it was done in this medium, or the message could have been delivered better if it was done simpler rather than complex. And it's a good practice, and I encourage everyone to kind of do that self-reflection with their own practice.
I have a
I
question.
think self-reflection is something that's very important. Yes, Emma, please go ahead.
I have like my question is basically placing yourself in another situation. So basically, Shaikha, imagine if our countries were generally not colonized and we weren't influenced by Western byproduct. How do you think your art process would be different? Because as we create the ideal canon is always Western art. Like even as we sit here, our references were mainly Western artists. How do you think it would be different if Western art was not held as ideal, or let's say put on a pedestal?
Okay, I think that's a very important question, Sama. Now it lays down to education. The first book that we're handed in our freshman is History of Western Art. Do we blame education? That's just called ignorance. I believe today we have enough sources of online galleries, artists that had no Western education. Our pioneers here, didn't have that Western education, were making beautiful art. Conceptual art ahead of the region's time. And I believe, yes, we were given these books, but we can't limit ourselves again with having Western ideologies and labeling them, labeling ourselves with these ideologies. And I try to refrain from labels as an artist. I used to, I'm not a sculptor, not an Emirati artist, and I'm just an artist that makes work. Yes, my works can be defined as minimal. We spoke about this even earlier. It can be, described as, I don't know, I mean, main thing one would put on, as soon as you read my work, you would say it's minimal in its aesthetics. But we also answered that even in Islamic art, it's very minimal in its aesthetics. It's stripped away from image making, and so is my work. So it's really a description, I would say. Minimal is not, I wasn't doing works in the 1950s to call myself a minimalist artist, but the aesthetics of my work is minimal in its looks.
I think that's brilliant, and that conception blew my mind the minute you told me it. Yeah, and it didn't fail to do so again.
Thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Shaikha. Are there any more questions? Because we're running short on time. So if anyone has any questions or anything to say, now's the time.
I would just say thank you for providing such a space for us to exchange as artists and to exchange ideologies and processes, especially within the region. So yeah, thank you to the girls that actually organized this, and it was a beautiful space to exchange.
Thank you, Sama.
I would second Sama. I'm really proud of what you're doing as a collective. I think we should do that more of, you know, informal discussions as artists. I know most of the faces here, and it doesn't have to be, you know, that formal where, you know, we can just come together. Sama had a very you know, a list of interesting questions for her research, and I felt like it would have been much more fruitful if it wasn't just me and Sama over a Zoom conversation, but it was in a discussion where, you know, answers are being bounced, you know, and what you're doing, Naba, Dania, Laha, together is really enriching.
It's nice to hear that. That's the whole point of this, because of course, like when we sit in person and we discuss, I mean, of course, thanks to COVID, there isn't much we can do, but I think one thing is that, I don't know, I think there are people here from all over the world. So I think that's great, because that's one thing we can do on this platform. So, and it's something that's definitely needed. I mean, we've asked questions in the session that have been going on for years. I mean, sure, we didn't come to answers, but I think it's important to be, like Shaikha said, it's important to keep those questions going. So if anyone has anything else to say, or if there are no more questions, I think we're going to wrap up the session here. I think, Shaikha, this was really, really nice. A lot more interactive, and this is what we had hoped for, so that's great. Thank you everyone for joining in. I think we now know what our next book for the book club will be for next season, taking into account the art of not making. So we'll keep that in mind. Please look out for the details for the next session that will take place on June 15th, same time, 7 p.m. on Tuesday. And we will be discussing the chapter The Biennale with a very enthusiastic guest speaker who will be revealed shortly. So stay tuned. As always, if you have any feedbacks or comments or follow-up questions, feel free to drop us a DM or email us. I'll just put that in the chat. Whoops.
Thank you all very much for discussing, for engaging. This is all has been fun, and thank you so much, Shaikha.
Thank you. Pleasure.
Yeah, thank you, Rummān, the collective.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you, Shaikha.
Have a great evening,
Thank
everyone.
you all for being here today. Thank you.
Of course.
Thank you very much.